So I hope you had a good lunch and you're still awake after lunch. My name is Gadi. I'm with the venture arm of Bosch, a German corporate which does many things, healthcare being one of them. I was given the honor of moderating this panel with my esteemed colleagues, with Shun, Jasper, Lily, and Chris. And as a start, I'd like each of us to very shortly present the organization that they are part of and their activity, but make it short. The purpose of the panel today is argue about things and try to make a bit of an interesting discussion rather than just tell you with long, boring presentations of 50 slides each. So, Shun, would you like to go first?
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Shun Matsumoto, President of Astellas Venture Management. Astellas Pharma Inc. is headquartered based in Tokyo, Japan, and our organization, US organization, Astellas Venture Management, which is the corporate venture capital arm of Astellas, is based in Menlo Park, this area of California. And we started our operation about 20 years ago, and now we have about historically 60 companies invested, not just the United States, but also in the European territory as well. And among them, we have about 10 companies as active portfolio, which means we have both observer right to see the company's progress and monitoring the company, and we wanted to communicate those companies with our headquarters, BD and R&D. That's about us. Here's Sean.
Jasper, if you have the voice.
Sure, I'll try. Well, at least I'm amplified, which is pretty good. So, okay, good afternoon all. I'm Jasper Bos. I'm the Managing Director of M Ventures. M Ventures is a 300 million euro evergreen fund that is dedicated to the business of Merck KGaA, so Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany. Merck is a very diverse company. We have activities both in pharmaceuticals, performance materials, and we are the leader in life science technologies with Merck Millipore and Sigma-Aldrich. We run 4 different types of funds. We have funds basically for all of the business divisions, with the healthcare fund being the oldest and most well established. We have, in addition, we have a fund that's dedicated to forming new types of businesses, which invest in, amongst others, digital health, artificial intelligence, and other types of technologies, with the aim to sustain the future of Merck, basically. Our investment strategy is very active. We are very early stage investors. We have no ownership restrictions. So quite often I would say we are company founders. We have the tendency to also structure and become active as interim management in our companies. And that is a very nice way of being not only an investor but also an entrepreneur, which is, I think, quite unique in a corporate setting. Notable examples of companies where we did that successfully. For instance, Braxton Therapeutics, which was sold last year for 1.1 billion, which was founded by M Ventures. Opsiva, which was a company which is now Nasdaq listed, which we paid a large role in setting up, and the same with a number of other companies.
Lily.
So my name is Lily. I'm with Molex Ventures. So for those of you who don't know Molex Ventures, my marketing VP would like me to say that you're no more than 2 centimeters from probably a Molex product. So we are a electronic solution manufacturer headquartered in Illinois, but we are a global company. We're about $7 billion company. We're also owned by Koch Industries, so the Coke with the K, not the Coke with the Coca-Cola, so in case if people are mistaken. So we're the corporate venture arm. We're strategic investors. Specifically, we're looking for investment into drug delivery systems, point of care, diagnostic systems, in diabetes, oncology, cardiac care, and COPD. Those are the 4 focus areas that we have. We also have recently also announced the first connected health device that we have jointly developed with our customer base. So that's something as a first connected health platform injector. So it's something that to look up for. Early stage investor, typically looking for anywhere between Series A and C, but we'd like to get to know you probably when you guys are in a seed round.
Hi, my name is Chris Gagliardi. I work for Sanofi Ventures. Sanofi Ventures is the strategic venture capital arm of Sanofi Pharmaceuticals. We invest in early stage companies that are too early or too risky for the parent organization to take on itself. In general, we're interested in rare disease vaccines. I'm sure somebody in this room, or many of us in this room, have a Sanofi Pasteur vaccine in them. And then historically, we've had a fairly broad interest in neurology, oncology, and digital health as well. We're 6 investors, primarily based in Boston, but we also just opened up an office in Europe. We're a $330 million evergreen fund that launched in 2012. Since then, we've done 25 investments in new companies. We've done 28 follow investments, excuse me. We've had 13 exits that include 12 IPOs and 1 trade sale. So very excited to be here and talk to you today.
Great. And our fund, just to complete the picture, is actually it's a virtual fund that we work on. So they're not an evergreen, but they're kind of funds that are bound in time. We're now on our 4th fund of 200 million euros. And as I said, we do many things in addition to healthcare, ranging from enabling technologies through automation and control and other things that are relevant for automotive and IoT and other interesting things around the world. So maybe to kickstart the discussion, Chris, first victim. So you just touched on the fact that you are doing things that are too early or too risky for the parent company to take on.
Yes.
So what are the pros and cons of actually taking money from a CVC, and how do you actually make the separation between the business of the parent company and the interests of the invested company and the VC? So how do you guys do it?
So first of all, that's a great question. I think before I start, I would love to know, just in the room by a raise of hands, who here has interacted with a corporate venture capital group outside of this conference? Okay, great. That's good to know. And I think that question really highlights, I think, some of the really key questions that you're going to want to ask, because all the questions that Gabby asked are going to be really important because they're all different. The way that we separate from our parent organization is going to be very different from the way that other therapeutic or strategic investors are going to separate from their own parent organization. So I think it really is a case-by-case basis. Most CVCs are going to be either strategically driven or financially driven. That's one of the first questions you're going to want to ask. So I'm answering from the perspective of a strategic corporate venture capital investor that is still a legal entity connected to their company. And again, these are all really important questions that you're going to want to know the answers to. So our value proposition when we're working with potential companies that we invest in is access to learnings, access to expertise. Sanofi is a company of 110,000 people. We do $40 billion a year in revenue, and so if a startup is resource constrained, there will be questions. There will be things that you don't know. You'll be operating potentially on a shoestring budget, and so one of the things that's nice about a strategic investor is, first of all, we provide access through our investment, A to money, B to expertise, connection to business development teams, connection to medical teams, connection to scientists. The other nice thing of getting investments from, I would say, strategic investors is it's also a potential exit. So there's a lot of really nice perks to working with a strategic investor, in addition to the validation of, for example, Sanofi is a big pharma company. There's a lot of other networking opportunities that are involved with that. I would say on the other side of that, we're driven by strategy. So in a lot of instances, especially in larger companies, there's the potential for, I would say, shifting strategies. Strategies can shift, and sometimes that means large corporate venture capital entities, they will have certain policies on potentially supporting previous investments going forward. And I think, again, that's a really important thing to look for from a track record perspective. We value our reputation in the ecosystem, and so as a result, we make it a habit, regardless of where the strategic winds are blowing, to support our portfolio companies, because in the future, if a good opportunity has the choice of where to take money, they are very likely going to turn to investors that are likely to stay with them through good times and bad. Again, these are all publicly available things usually, so you can usually have conversations about policies on supporting previous investments moving forward. Strategic change. That's a long-winded example for me, but I'm happy to pass it on if anyone else wants to.
Jasper, how is it done at Merck?
Yeah, I would say to a large extent very similar. One of the things that we have is a very strong Chinese wall between the activities of M Ventures and Merck, which means that we are a facilitator. We are a facilitator of connections, nothing more. We would never take any options. We would never take any rights because I don't believe in having 2 or 3 different heads when I'm sitting in a board. We would always require to take a board seat, and that is because of the nature of the type of investments we do, which is very, very early stage. To us, eventually, whether Merck acquires one of our companies, yes or no, is largely irrelevant because we are a connector. Our goal is not to have our companies being acquired by Merck. Our goal is to make sure that Merck has had the opportunity to create a relationship that goes beyond the normal, we see each other at a business development conference and we say hi. And that's a very powerful tool because on one hand, it really helps if you have management teams in front of senior management. They see each other once a year, every 18 months, and you see very clear progress on both sides. And especially for Merck as a mid-sized pharma company, if we talk about the pharma part of our business, you really have to go that extra mile. So I think the Chinese wall between the corporation and the venture fund is extremely important, but it also means that for us, in our role as investor, we have a dual mandate, we have an evergreen structure. So for us, the initial investment always needs to come with a certain level of sponsorship, which means that someone in the business needs to say, well, this is not well validated enough, this is too early stage, but potentially game-changing, let's say the 7 to 10 year time frame. For the follow-on investment, we will always simply look only at economics. Because, as was also highlighted by Chris, as an investor, you cannot afford to become seen as unreliable. And also on our end, very simple, if we don't do that at a certain point in time, there will simply be no more money left, because you can't run an evergreen fund on an ever-shifting pharma strategy. Because we all know that strategy in pharma changes probably once a year or at least every 2 years.
Shun, how is it with the organization? How do you keep the separation and?
In terms of our activity, pretty much same with the previous 2 sessions. We are also strategic investors, so that's why when we make an investment, we always ask the investee company to give us observer right and also some kind of regular meeting with our research science or our BD people, which means because we are strategic investors, that's why it is very important to make connection with the headquarters activity. So those 2 things are pretty much important for us. That may be unique for us is that we also have done the kind of spin-out activity or headquarters assets. We have already done this for 3 assets, and we created actually 3 companies for those each 3 assets. And also recently we did a build to buy model, which is we created other venture capital company and preset some of the margin price, preset the margin price, and after the 2 to 3 years of that activity, we finally, our headquarters decided to acquire those companies. So those are kind of the unique parts of our activity.
Yeah, for us, we actually, I would say 90% of the companies that we invest in are actually not going to be acquired by Molex. They likely will be acquired by one of our customers because of our uniqueness as a B2B. So I think in some way, my investment, like when you talk about the pros and cons, the pros are very similar with what everybody is saying. You get the business development, you get the credibility, you get the cash, and then the connection and all that. But I'll just go to the negative side since you wanted it to be controversial. So we do put in poison pills. We do ask for exclusivity terms. We do ask for rights. However, we try to be really asking for terms in a way that is friendly for entrepreneurs. As in, we're really asking for these rights to protect us from our direct competitor. The last thing we want is to work with a startup company, really create a lot of value into the company, and then have our direct competitor just acquire them and pull the funds from underneath company. So most of our, call it exclusivity or ROFR type of rights, are restricted. They're not like, comprehensive raw.
Did you get situations where companies said, okay, we're not willing to get to go into this direction because
So
of
I
the
think
poison
this-
pills or these exclusivity?
Yeah, I think we've managed to have a few things, right? One is, if we no longer perform all those strategic things that we asked you for, or we promised you that we're going to do, these rights should go away. If we're not creating a value, why should you be honoring these rights, right? It should be mutual. So we have the sunset rights, or sunset triggers, typically that happen. And secondly, if we do ask for ROFR rights, normally it's a short list of direct competitor. And most of them, they're able to swallow that and they understand that. And as I said, because 90% of what we invest in really exit to our customers, it doesn't exit to our direct competitors. They normally really understand where we're coming from, especially when you explain that, hey, this is really to protect us. This is, especially if we're going to be creating all of these IP with you and you're the one who owns it, this is really for our protection.
I can only add one thing from our experience. The thing we found to be the most effective tool to convince ourselves in the market that we keep it clean, so to speak, is that our fund is not only measured also on financial returns in addition to strategic value, but also we are compensated on financial performance. And that keeps us really honest. So once you have to make returns, all the interests of the shareholders align. And that's the best message to the market that you can find, or at least that we find effective. Now, everyone likes a good story, and I'd be appreciative if my colleagues can tell you a combination of stories, like a good story and a horror story from their experience that maybe gives an example. I don't know if we have any volunteers around the table here.
I'm happy to tell a good story.
But they have to come in couples, It's a good and horror.
I'll make this sort of short and anecdotal. There's not, I don't want to dig too deep into specifics, but I think if our model works the way that it is supposed to, it means that we find technology or science that is very interesting and promising, but too early, too risky for business development. That's a very sweet spot because we don't take any rights, and so if something is interesting enough, then business development might come in and pick it up. But we've done a number of investments in companies. This is all public, so this is fine, but we've done investments in Science 37, Immune Design, and Evidation, where our investment led to a much larger investment from the parent company. And unlike perhaps some other models, our success is measured directly by the business development transactions that are facilitated by our investments. And so it's really nice when that model works, both externally, because it means that if Sanofi invests in you, it has the potential to translate to a much larger deal again. When we sell ourselves as a potential exit, when we actually have proof in the pudding of that, that's very nice. But it also makes us look good in the fact that we're able to bring in and seek technologies and touch early stage ecosystems in a way that the parent organization would not be able to. And I guess I have to give my pound of flesh for my negative story. I think this kind of harps on something I was saying a little bit earlier before, is making sure that your investors are willing to stick with you through thick and thin. I don't think it's hyperbole to describe it a little bit like a marriage. This is a very relationship and trust-based thing that's being put in place. You work together through for a long time. And so, in this case, I don't feel comfortable naming names, but in some instances, you have investors where the company's running out of cash, building a business is hard, things cost more, things take longer than you think they're going to take. And something like a bridge or another round is needed, and if the other investors around the table, or one or two, are not willing to invest because the strategic area is no longer top of mind, it becomes very difficult to raise capital in those respects. And so we've had a couple of instances where we've had to really put in some groundwork to find those additional investors to keep the companies afloat. We're willing to do that, but we'd much rather not. I'd rather be focusing on finding new and innovative skills.
If you like,
I have a horror story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not us, it's someone else, but I'll tell it. No, it is actually not us, but it's a good horror story because no one actually intended it to go wrong, but it went wrong. And it is a story of a small company that had a strategic investor, not one, but actually two, which is also a very good thing, because when you take two strategic investors, you kind of balance the thing and you're not kind of painted or colored with one color, red in the case of Bosch or blue in the case of Samsung, whatever. But in this story, one of the company had a strategic investor, and we were also on the cap table. And there was a project, a very big project that actually the whole company was gearing towards and working on for almost a year and a half. And as large companies sometimes do, without anyone meaning anything bad, one day management said, well, this project is no longer that strategic for us, and they axed the project, not because they wanted to kill the company, but it killed the company. And the real learning from it is startup companies should not get confused by the fact that they have a good backer and a big project, and should always keep some level of independence. Very dangerous to kind of become one, just gravitate towards one important customer, even if this customer is also a shareholder. That's my horror story, not us again. Lily.
Yeah. So I'll share the horror stories. Since good stories, you don't learn much from it, because if you did it right, it goes right. I think the bad one was, it really taught me how important is relationship building and trust in that partnership. Because, and I know my lawyers will kill me for saying partnership, because the lawyers really don't want me to say partnership. But anyway, we had a company that we were the first strategic investor, and when we invested in them, obviously, they wanted access to our customer. They wanted to go to, the top 10 customers that we have. Now, us knowing that they are a startup company would advise against going after the big fruit company, because it's brutal. So we said, how about this? We'll give you a second tier customer that we have a really good relationship with, help you work out the kinks, and then you go from there. Unfortunately, I think the management team was like, no. We want to shoot for the star. We want to do this. Why are you stopping us? You're not being a good partner. You're not a good, corporate supporter for us. Blah blah blah. And we're like, well, you're not ready. We don't want to feed you to the wolves. We have a team of 25 people that supports this account, and we feel like we're being fed to the wolves. So at the end of the day, we kind of broke down and said, fine. If you really wanted to do this, and I wanted to be a good corporate strategic investor, we will make the intro. But that's it. What happens afterwards? Of course, they get overrun by the company, and all of a sudden, they were one of the experimentation project, and of course, that project closed. All the resources were just stuck. Now, what are we going to do? So I hate to say that I told you so, but unfortunately, this is my story. I told you so.
I told you so.
Yeah, I told you so.
Okay. Unless I want to have any other important stories, I can move on to our next happy subject, which is the economic environment that we're kind of facing at the moment, and the other cold winds from different directions. So first of all, maybe starting from Shun, and again, what is your kind of outlook for the next 2 or 3 years? And in light of, or assuming that you don't think everything is going to be happy and dandy, what would be your recommendations for the men and women that are sitting in this room?
Sure. At the beginning of this panel discussion, I told you that we have a history of 20 years. During those last 20 years, there's an up and down about the economy, especially around 2006 or 7, around 7, there's a big economic downturn. And during even those time frame, we as a strategic investor, and also we are always trying to find a new science. We are always 100% focusing on science part, not on the financial part. Because of that, I guess we have not so much, distress about the activity. So that's, I think, even the situation that gradually changing for the next 2 to 3, I totally agree upon. But I think at least we can keep our policy, keep on going. Then there will be the chance that we can make another successful next 2 years. That's my
Jasper?
Yeah, I think we're living in extremely interesting times still. And we started Global Ventures in 2009, and as a very early stage, quite of a seed investor, we have been in situations where you literally knock on the door of 100 VCs in start to realize who your friends are, and you actually don't have any friends. And then actually compare that to the situation where we are in today, where I have one example of a company where we're now closing preclinical, a 70 million euro round of a company that we wrote the business plan for 3 years ago. And these are times that are literally unheard of. So I would say grab as much money as you can, because this is a cyclical business. And especially in the European setting, I think we have never been in times, as far as I can remember. I think the last time was probably late 1990s probably, where you had a similar type of boom. The flip side of that is that you get some sort of strange kind of over-excitement, and it leads to situations where, as an early stage investor, typically we always have a boom. You can bring something from hit stage close to IND in a small molecule for, let's say, between 8 and 10 million euros. That has always been our sweet spot. And right now, I only see business plans where that amount is actually almost doubled. And the technologies have not changed. Nothing has changed. But also the exit valuations have not changed that much. So, in other words, I think I'm just losing my voice again completely. So I'll shut up in 30 seconds. But these are extremely good times to be a founder of a company. These are, I think I've never seen so many investors that actually are very actively gravitating towards doing seed investments. We see seed investments now being actually done as syndicated seed investments. And that is simply because if you're not in there right from the start, you will never get into a company. We see companies that get funded for 4 to 5 years, gigantic runway, which we all should profit from, because probably 3-4 years from now, we will be in a different situation again.
So, same thing, I don't see really a huge impact, but really, I would say, in general, be really careful kind of timing out when you're going out to funding, because I would say startup, you really have, call it 3 or 4 major funding stages, right? Your first stage is you're selling for a vision. Then your second stage is hopefully you have a proof of concept and regulatory path and understand where you're heading into, right? And the third is hopefully you've got some sort of regulatory progress and hopefully try to get a CMS code or something like that. I think a startup company in the times where I guess financially maybe a little bit tighter, to make sure that you're raising enough fund to really hit the next milestone, so that when you do go out to raise your next round, you have that big headline, so that allows you the maximum capital that you can be on the other side of the table, really choosing whose capital you want to take. So I would say really timing it out, make sure that you raise enough and not too much as well.
Maybe moving on to trends that we're seeing in the market today, and how does that affect our investment agenda. Chris, what from your standpoint are the key trends that are in the world today, and how is your plans for 2019 and 2020 are?
I think the previous subject that we had both spoken about, that we'd all kind of spoken about, is a big piece of that. I think more biotech financing had occurred in the first 3 quarters of 2018 and all of 2017. More than half of that was early stages in the United States, speaking of. And so I think that the getting is quite good right now. So there's a few question marks on how long that's going to last for. I think, again, to Jas's point, it's striking while the iron hot is important. But we can spend some time on that. I think beyond that, I think the way that we treat disease is fundamentally changing. The word curative is entering the lexicon. Gene and cell therapy has put a massive question mark on durability of response, the curative ability of how we treat disease, and potentially changing how people die. And there's a lot of question marks about that. So I think it is challenging for entrepreneurs and good as human beings that this is something that we're changing. I think the bar is raising, and I think it's about time, but it's not that long ago that cancer was a barren wasteland of chemotherapy. Right? So I think understanding that the bar is raising for what we want to treat and what we can treat is changing. Fundamental breakthroughs in science and technology are enabling that. And so I think differentiating yourself scientifically and clinically and commercially in that landscape is going to be really important. I also think the boundary conditions with which we treat disease are also changing. We are now much more cost conscious of how things are going to be treated, whether it's worth it to treat certain diseases a certain way, and so cost is now also entering the lexicon, along with breakthrough and curative. I think these are things, these are nexuses that entrepreneurs will have to traverse. And I think finally, historically, the way that wealth has concentrated itself into countries is also changing. And there are fundamental changes in the way that not only that disease will be treated from a scientific perspective, but there are markets and countries and cultures that are opening up to modern medicine that I think also are going to pose a much larger commercial challenge for large companies. And I think these are all considerations that are going to have to be made as the next generation of innovation looks to make its way sort of into the mainstream approach to thinking about disease.
Sure.
Yeah, so for us, very initial stage, let's say 10 years ago, we've been setting our, limited amount of putting of money for each company is about 5 million. But we are very much welcome. Every company can easily give us a board observer. However, things have 100% changed, especially recently. In terms of, let's say, Series A, they are now trying to easily get money about 50 million. And then those 50 million is not easy for us to get. We will put 5 million, so please give us a board observer. Does not make sense for each of the companies. So from that standpoint, CBC, from our side, we have to change our strategy of how much we can put our money for our company or our history, and how can we communicate them through the strategy. Like that is a very important point. We always want to change, and we want to change. I think very positively.
Okay, maybe I'll answer my own questions also. So what we see in terms of trends, and this is actually very broad, is obviously we see artificial intelligence making its way everywhere. And even where it's not so relevant, it's being put into every slideshow because this is it's a must now, apparently. But actually, I think it really is transformative, and it really could make our life in many domains, healthcare definitely being one of them, stronger. I look at China as an interesting example of a healthcare area that both gets a lot of budget, but in some sense starting from a position which is to some sense behind, but leapfrogging a lot of the way things are done in the Western world into a different level. And I think that's, for me, a very interesting test case to look at. So China definitely a place for us to look at, and AI. I want to maybe one comment about the topic that was mentioned before about the economic changes, and I think startups should be, first of all, take the money and run is a good philosophy, but you really need to run carefully, and you really need to remember that after a sunny day there's going to be some rain, and I think rain is bound to come. There's no question in my mind. Any further things about trends, or shall we ask some questions from the audience So please ask us questions, but don't ask easy questions. Ask interesting questions and make our lives hard.
I'll take the easy questions.
Go ahead.
One of the concerns that we hear as we're trying to raise capital is that we're a pre-revenue company. How do you guys feel about pre-revenue companies?
Okay, for those who haven't heard, the question was, how do we feel about pre-revenue companies, as this is a concern that's being raised when people try to raise funds?
Yeah, it really depends what area you're operating in. I can tell you we would never ever invest in a revenue-generating pharmaceutical company.
Fair point.
I would say like most of us probably all invest in pre-revenue. I don't think that's a concern. I think once you're getting, I think the people that are telling you that they need to see revenue are different type of funds. I think people here are more strategic and more thinking about early, and they need to get in early. Like, especially for me, you're making a device, you come to me when you're already done. And what's my value to you? I have to be there much earlier when you have the issue, you can leverage the knowledge or leverage the expertise to help you solve the problem. So we look at pre-revenue.
And to add to that, I think as you engage with venture funds, the good, I think Lily's point is excellent. I think the question is how pre-revenue.
Sure.
Is the question. I think that's really, I think the risk profile just by definition says pre-revenue. But right for Sanofi Ventures, particularly, it's even before in-human POC. So I just think the strategic fit and appetite and risk appetite for everybody sitting up here will be different, but I think to Lily's point, everyone's doing.
Well, I'd love to tell you about it.
I got 1,500 business cards and my suitcase is heavy.
Questions? Knows everything, that's good. There's one, okay, go ahead.
What type of rain were you talking about when you said we should expect rain?
The type of rain is acid rain. No. So, seriously speaking, I think, look, when I've been through the previous crisis of 2000, I was a younger investor at the time. And what we have seen is that all of a sudden, in a similar fashion like a house of cards collapses, the industry collapsed. And it started from customers that all of a sudden disappeared. So companies that simply stopped paying in certain business models or certain market segments that all of a sudden go away. And you see a combination of two things. Your actual revenues decline and your source of funds decline. And by the way, we are experiencing the same problem when we come to raise funds for our organizations, or less so maybe for venture funds that are linked to corporates, because corporates are less volatile, but also for them, because my CFO or our CFO, when the business goes bad, if you come to tell them, well, our fund is finished its investment and we want another 150 million euros to play around with, which is what he thinks it is, because that's what we usually do. He says, well, but I have a cash flow issue, so why don't we put this on hold? And that's like the nice CFO. The other one just tells you, I don't mess with my head. I have no bandwidth or intention to divert resources for this issue. And for example, Bosch is a German company, and in Germany, let's say you're going through a difficult period and you want to cut down your workforce. You immediately get this wave of criticism, so you're firing employees, but you're playing around with 150 million euros on all sorts of hokey pokey around the world. What kind of order of priority do we have? So this rain thing comes in multiple directions, and all of a sudden companies struggle, and some of the investors disappear, and some of the business, the top line is reducing. And you can see the whole industry actually kind of slowing down for a period of 2 or 3 or 4 years sometimes, it depends.
And I will even add that when you have financial pressure, I think when your core business isn't performing as well, typically you see potentially top management change. How often when
Right.
businesses aren't performing, then the CEO gets fired and then you get a new CEO. What happens with CVC arms when you get a new CEO?
Yeah.
It's a 6 months delay. You got to get the new leader, understand and see your vision, align with the vision, and make sure that works. Now, if you have an evergreen fund, that's great. That's a great story. At least you've got an earmark and everything. But I'm with you. Because I think your CFO is maybe, no, we're focused on cost cutting. We're focused on really doing more with less. That is less people or same amount of resources, but focusing on doing more. Then your project, because we're being measured on strategic value. So if your project don't have people working on it, or it's seen as a sideline project or a pie in the sky, then you're not really successful either. So I think that's where you're going to see is the allocation of really resources to help you do what it is. So.
The first thing that investors do, and I'm talking now of financial investors, not just CVCs, when they see the downturn in the market coming or suspected to be coming, they just start sitting on their hands and waiting. They say, well, let's say I have 50% of my funds still in my pocket. I'll wait. I don't want to end my fund in the peak of the crisis because then I'm not going to be able to raise any money. So all of a sudden your funding sources really dry out. And our problem as corporate VCs is that we are just non-core. I don't think any of these corporates here would say that the venture activity is a core activity. Even though it's important, it's contributing, it's great, it's non-core. We're not a venture business. We're a business of industrial or drug development or whatnot.
No, I think let me slightly disagree with that.
Good.
Of course, as a corporate VC, I have a huge stake in that, but I would say that our core business is innovation. And looking at pharmaceuticals, understanding that 75% of innovation in pharma is typically coming from external, I would say that you have to educate your parent company that you are actually core to the future, because this is where innovation is coming from, this is where future revenues are coming from. And I think that is something where you have to spend a lot of time in with senior management. And I would say changes in management leading to changes in corporate venture strategy or even disappearance of funds. Obviously that can happen, but on the other hand, you have a lot of pharma VCs that have been out there for 20, 30, 35 years and that have sustained through multiple crises exactly because of the fact that innovation is so important.
So there's two learnings from you. First of all, when you're in trouble in a crisis, go to Jasper. That's a good thing. And I'd just like to know one thing. In the crisis of 2000, I think about 45% of corporate VCs disappeared. Okay? This is the number.
Okay, that was my question, whether you guys felt you're more durable than business development types. Because business development types, in my experience, are very risk averse in many cases because, boom, their job's gone. So are you more durable than business development? You just mentioned, you suggested you may not be.
I think it depends on the organization. I think my company, I can say that looks at our activity is very important, and it's such a large company on the one hand that we are not huge activity. So I think we're good through we're good through the 2007-8 crisis. So it was it really affected our business, the Bosch business. So
yeah, we were set up in the middle of the financial crisis.
It does also depend on the size of the CVC in comparison to the parent company. I mean, for a company that does $40 billion a year, $330 million evergreen fund is nice in this room, but it's also not it's a bucket. So I think for for a large pharma company, looking at its P&L and BD is potentially a bigger focus. I'll just have one quick point on the previous one. I'll try to make it very quick. Now probably a little bit more in Jazz's court here on. There are some good things and bad things about a potential downturn, right? I think one of the reasons why it's been such a great year for raising money is that the exits have been fantastic. Financially driven investors have made a tremendous amount of money, and these IPOs have been they've been making everyone quite a bit of money. I think if that starts to go the other way, what we will likely see are less friendly term sheets going to companies, and from an innovation perspective, and this is why Jazz's comment sort of brought me here is things will quote unquote be a little bit less expensive on the investment side because there's might be a little bit less competition for innovation, but I would not fundamentally expect the speed of innovation to change that much. And so to some extent it might be nice from an access to innovation from a cost perspective, but again, the money that we're spending as VCs might be a little bit more challenging to come by.
yes.
My question is, I guess, primarily for those of you that invest in therapeutics. I know traditionally cell and gene therapy have not been seen to have the highest ROI across, big pharma's portfolio set, and so there's been an aversion towards investing in early stage cell and gene therapy. And I'm curious whether you see that changing or whether, within your organizations it's a tough sell if you come across a
I think it depends on your business model, because quite often I think the limited ROI on gene therapies and cellular therapies was simply caused by the fact that there was a lack of regulatory pathways, and there was also quite often a lack of understanding of how would you fit that in the traditional pharmaceutical business. I see now with the acquisition of Kite and a number of other companies with approved gene therapies in the market, and actually with a pathway for reimbursement, I think most of the hurdles are gone. It still probably means that inside of Kite we are an oncology-focused company, oncology and immunology, and on our end, probably cellular therapies, gene therapy is still very far away, so we would probably not be the best company to talk to.
We have only a few minutes left, so if there's no other questions, I would like our panelists to give one word of advice that they can to start to the people in the room, their experience. Go.
I'll get something very practical. As someone, we reviewed over 600 deals last year. I'll look for the easiest way to kill something, and if I can't kill it, then I'll take a neutral call. So know your audience. I think if you're going to send somebody a slide deck, it's going to get really hard for someone to look through it. So be succinct to know who your audience is. Give them the information they need to give it a quick yes or no. Don't get offended if it's no. Usually it's just strategy.
Lily?
I think relationship is definitely important, but make sure that you are strategically aligned, especially working with a VC. Otherwise, you do risk some potential conflicts down the road.
Yeah, it's very long and very much along the lines of Chris. It is basically know your audience, but know the funds that you're targeting, because quite a lot of funds are funds that either are at the end of their investment period, they are actually not actively investing, and that is actually a lot of opportunity cost. And the flip side of that is also if you are the final investment of a large fund and you need to raise a new round of funding, and you are in a downturn, you might actually have a much bigger problem. And that is where corporate VCs are typically a little bit less stringent in timing, because we have an evergreen nature. We have the capability to go beyond the traditional 10-year time frame. But obviously, we have to be very careful when we go invest with, because you don't want to be that only circle in that actually keeps on funding the company, because the rest of the syndicate is actually out of my way.
One thing I would like to say is that because all of us on corporate venture capital, that means we always wanted to have a dialogue between your investing company and our headquarters in BD and R&D people. If you are very comfortable and flexible about making that kind of opportunity, then you are the very good fit, I guess, for receiving money from us.
So have a great conference, guys.